Let's look at a very special 1796 light cavalry sabre for a very fancy officer. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now in the past I've shown a few variations, this being one, of the 1796 light cavalry sabre. Now this is the famous Osborne and Gumby, which is highly coveted with the clip point blade, straighter blade. It's a good compromise design aimed at making the 1796 light cavalry sabre perhaps a bit more versatile and perhaps a bit better at thrusting. But many people were absolutely happy with the 1796 curved hatchet pointed slashing blade. It was very, very popular, very, very successful, copied by the Prussians. So what do you do if you're a very fancy British Napoleonic officer, perhaps around the time of the Battle of Waterloo, let's say about 1815, maybe 1810, and you want just a really fancy one? Well, here you go. This isn't top of the line, but it's probably about 4/5 of the way up the line, okay? So this is an example which was retailed by a outfitter called Johnston. I don't know who made it. Could have been someone like Gill. Could have indeed been Osborne and Gumby. But this features a number of things which are unusual. I'm going to quickly go through them as a nice little something different for a Friday. Right, so first off, we're going to look at the blade. So hopefully the eagle-eyed amongst you will have instantly noticed that this is a so-called blue and gilt blade. The end of the blade is almost always kept brightly polished. In fact, this is kind of undergoing restoration and cleaning at the moment, so it will be a little bit cleaner than this when it's done, but you'll see this is basically mirror polished, but it is the standard shape of blade. It's a fairly light example. The officers' ones tend to be lighter than the troopers' ones. I weighed this is 775 grams, so it's under 800 grams. It's pretty light and it feels fantastic in the hand. So it's a good broad 1796 light cavalry sabre blade, standard regulation shape, but fancy. And you will notice the bottom half of the blade has been blued, and then the decoration, if I just come up close here, the decoration is engraved and then with gilding put in here. Now obviously this sword is 200 years old, so you can see the line there, the chevron between the blued and the mirror polish, and then down here you've got all sorts of floral and patriotic emblems. We've got on this side, just show you that side, there we go. There is a cavalryman there, raising up his sabre above his head on his horse, on his charger. And down here, just hidden under the langet, is quite a bit of gilding. So where all of this engraving would have had a lot more gilding on it, but most of it's rubbed off, just leaving the sort of engraving with the kind of silver colour of the blade showing through. So this would have had more blue and more gilt originally, but there's a fair amount of it surviving, as you can see. It's absolutely solid in the hilt. It's lovely, lovely, lovely sword. A few other details. So officers' versions of these swords often have this little, let me just get it to focus instead of on my face. There we go. This little detail in here. Some are more fancy than others, but it's just nice little architectural detail. But the main feature of this is that shape here. Now you'll notice it has a fully encased pommel section known as a beak nose pommel. Now initially it was found that these 1796 grips, tell you what, I'll grab the Osborne and Gumby so I can demonstrate this for a second. So these grips normally have a piece of wood coming up here, okay, and that piece of wood, and you've got a metal around the back. Now this is designed to make a stronger hilt, but what often happened was this wood chipped and fell out. If you receive a hard blow on your knuckle bow here or here, it forces that wood to crack and drop out. Equally, if the hilt comes loose and you peen up here, it forces that wood to come out. So it's a common failure point, particularly on the more curved grips, and the more wood you have projecting out here, the more of a stress point it is. So what started to happen, if I go back to the fancy sabre here, what started to happen is they started to reinforce this section here, and then they made it fully iron as time went by, so that's fully encased. So you've still got that lovely canted ergonomic shape that the bottom finger, the little finger, can rest against and securely, but that is not going to break off. And if you look at the wood section now, because obviously underneath this grip wrapping is wood, you'll notice it doesn't hardly project out at all. So there's nothing left there to break off. So this is a very ergonomic grip, but it's also now a stronger grip which will last better. Now you'll also notice that the grip is not leather wrapped anymore, it is shagreen. Now shagreen is shark skin or ray skin, or what this probably is, dogfish skin. Now I have actually skinned dogfish myself for anthropological and experimental reasons to make shagreen, and it works. You can fish dogfish off the south coast of England, incidentally, completely legal. Right, so in Japanese swords, for example, they tend to use ray skin. Royal Navy swords tend to use ray skin. Most swords use forms of shark or dogfish. So this is dogfish. Why do that? Well, this is incredibly tough stuff. So you'll notice later Victorian swords are pretty much always covered in shagreen, but this was not a new thing, but it didn't get popular until the late Napoleonic period, and then really going into the sort of William IV and Victorian periods. So these shagreen grips, it came in George IV's time, essentially. So these shagreen grips get more and more popular in British swords anyway, in the late Napoleonic period. So this is a late Napoleonic, let's say 1810, 1815 officer's sword. As I say, could have been carried at Waterloo kind of thing, that kind of design. Final thing that's interesting about this sword that I'm going to notice for you is that these hilts sometimes get loose, and you'll notice that troopers' versions of these swords have a lateral rivet going through here, okay, just in the middle of the grip through there. But the officers' ones, although they sometimes do, some officers' ones do, they're usually a bit more dainty on the officers' ones, many of them get rid of that, and so as an extra point of strength, what they have done here is they actually put a screw into the ferrule just there, and that goes through. Sometimes you can just about see it coming through in a hole on the other side, just down there. So it actually has a screw going right the way through there as well. So that will help prevent the hilt getting loose. And in fact, this hilt is nice and tight still. So there we go. I'm going to finish it up there. Only other thing that's slightly interesting, I guess, for the real sword geeks out there is these particular ones have a split washer ring. So when you've got your key ring and you put keys on, these actually have split rings here, which is quite a new innovation at that time instead of a solid ring. But this is just a really lovely example of the sort of sword that a fairly well-heeled and well-to-do British light cavalry officer would have been carrying around the time late Peninsular War, but really more around the Battle of Waterloo. And indeed they continued carrying these after the Napoleonic Wars, during the occupation of France, for example, in 1816, all the way up until 1821, when the sword pattern changed. But even then, we know that some officers kept using their swords from before that time as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Please make sure you're subscribed, give us a like, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel in a few days' time for another video. Cheers, folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks!